Hello. If you're anything like me, you question your legal education. Does our legal education really prepare us for the real world? Do we really find employability as a factor in our legal education? What do law firms really want? Are we really equipped with all those skills that are in demand right now? Well, we attempt to answer all these questions in this one episode. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the One Take Show podcast. My name is Kaustubh. In this episode, we are in conversation with Mr. Sanjay Krishna. Sanjay is a co-founder of WorldWise.in. What is WorldWise.in? It's a wonderful website that gives you an opportunity to really explore the practical aspects of law. We talk more about this in the conversation itself. He's also previously worked in a top-tier law firm that is Khaitan and Co. In this episode, we talk about his journey with law, his experience in the law firm. Then we talk about why does legal education needs the revamping, how to land those big jobs, and what is it that law firms are looking for. If you like this episode, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you have any suggestions or feedbacks, write them down in the comment section or reach out to me. It works either way. Hence, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's jump right in. Hello Sanjay, welcome to the One Take Show podcast. I am so excited to have this conversation with you. I have followed your work. I think all these experiences that you had, especially the kind of values that you now talk of, the kind of values that you are in business with, and something that is reaching law students across platforms is absolutely incredible. And I think that requires me to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for taking time out from your busy schedule and sitting down with me for this conversation.
Thanks, Kaustubh, and thanks so much for engaging with what we do. We're trying to add value to students' lives every day, and I'm glad that you derive value in some form. And really excited to be on this platform. I think your podcast has had some wonderful guests so far, guests who've achieved far more than I have. But always happy to talk about what I think can help students and my learning so far, and whatever else and wherever else this conversation takes us.
Perfect. Well, there's one thing that obviously what you do adds value to a lot of law students. I think a lot of them have already benefited from your venture, and we will talk about it in a bit. And what you also mention is the idea behind this podcast is to add value, is initially to bring about the kind of conversations that could inspire people to perhaps move in a particular direction. And one way to do that is obviously to learn from someone's experience. So before we get into the crux of the conversation, if you could tell me a little bit about your experience in law school, or perhaps your experience in the initial years in the profession. What was all of that like? As a law student, what were your issues? What were your challenges? What was that experience like?
Right, I think those are two different questions as to what was my experience in law school, right? And what it was right after. And let me take them one after the other. I think I went to NLU Jodhpur. I graduated in 2018. And I had an incredible time at NLU Jodhpur. I think I'm very thankful to my alma mater for a lot of reasons. Mostly because I think I met a lot of incredible people who achieved, again, a lot of them achieved far more than I did, and inspired you, and they inspire you to push your boundaries, really. And I think that was the nicest part of being in college. Also, I think in the 5 years that I was there, I did a couple of things. One is I made a lot of friends who I continue to be in touch with and who help you and inspire you to take crazy decisions. But two, the beauty of at least life in a law school is that law school gives you a platform to really try everything. I'm a huge believer that you should try whatever opportunities you get. So I know a lot of people believe that, let's say, law school has a formula that you have to do certain things. It's definitely not something I believed in. I tried whatever I did. So I enjoyed doing a lot of things. I played a lot of sport. I was quizzing a lot. I was debating a lot. I did a bunch of ADR. So I did things that I really enjoyed. And in the process, I traveled the country, made lots of friends, and learned a lot. And I think each of those things and all of these different things helped shape my personality in a certain way. And I'm grateful for all of these things. And I think that's what my biggest takeaway from law school was. Personally, I think law school gave me the freedom to try 500 different things. And I learned from each of those things and something unique. Like I think I learned what I learned from debating, for instance, would be very different from what I learned, let's say, by playing tennis. And I think the beauty of law school is that it gives you the time to try all of these things and learn from them, which I don't think you necessarily get once you enter the profession. Because, like everyone says, the law is a harsh mistress, and that's justified. Because no matter what you do, you're probably going to be working long hours and all of that. So I think law school, at least my law school journey, was something that I really enjoyed because it gave me that freedom to really try and figure out what I like. And I think that's what I loved about law school.
Yeah. And then you actually worked in a top tier law firm for a couple of years, and you've had that experience with the professional front as well. Something that a lot of law school students they aspire for, something we all try to work towards. And that experience in itself is very valuable. But then you also decided to make a change. So in order to get to that change, to that point where you decided to make a change in your life, in your career, what was that experience like, and what were your major takeaways from that experience?
Right. So the first thing is that when I started out in law school, when I was a first year in law school, I wasn't someone who aspired to have a job at a corporate firm or any of that. So sure, it was an idea, but it was just another idea. I know a lot of first years, and I talk to first years sometimes, who from their first year, they've made up their mind that they really want to be a corporate lawyer or work in a tier one firm or all of that. But for me, I think joining the firm, at least I worked at Khaitan, and I was privileged to have worked there. I had a fantastic time. I worked there for 2 years in the corporate M&A practice. And I think that I was really lucky because I had some incredible mentors and I learned a lot, and people I'm still in touch with and have very, very fond memories and conversations with. But I think my journey at Khaitan, or the way I stumbled into Khaitan, was it wasn't something that there was a lot of planning in. I got an internship, and at the end of that internship, they ended up making me an offer when I was in my third year. So my decision to go into corporate law was almost because they gave me the offer, and I was like, yes, this sounds too good to be true. I had a great 1 month while interning. Let me figure out what I really want. So, and then I ended up joining Khaitan, and I had 2 years. And I think the 2 years at Khaitan taught me a lot of things, right? And I think they were very rewarding from a professional standpoint because I was not a process-oriented person at all. I was not necessarily the most organized. I was this crazy. I used to have fun. I would wing it a lot of times. I was okay doing things without preparation. But when you make it to a top-tier firm, you realize you can't necessarily do that anymore. Standards are high. I ended up becoming more process-oriented, which I think was my biggest takeaway from working at Khaitan. I also met a lot of people who inspire you to push the boundary and to be like the best version of yourself, whether that's in a professional standpoint or just, people who, and the people I used to really look up to were also people who made times for their family, who made time for fitness. And these were also things that people placed value on, and to see how they balanced their time while being immaculate professionals was, I think, two of the biggest takeaways that I had in my 2 years at Khaitan. Plus, I really enjoyed the work I did. So I'm not one of those people who didn't enjoy the work I did. I actually quite liked it. So that was an added benefit, I guess.
Perfect.
And speaking of the change, just speaking of the change, I think the change is something that, again, a lot of students have talked to me about. But why I decided to quit was, well, there are multiple reasons. But for one, I'm not one of those people who quit because I had a terrible boss, a terrible team, none of that, right? I think I had a great time. It was more a function of, when I was working at Khaitan, I ended up working and interacting with a lot of founders. I ended up working with a lot of startups. And what they did was they were solving problems at scale, and they were solving problems that I thought were very meaningful. For instance, I was working with a startup founder I was working with a startup where they were creating electric vehicles. And I was just saying that today, if you're creating electric vehicles, you're changing the lives of 1 million people, right? Potentially. Yes. And when you start, or when I entered the law, I always started as someone thinking that the reason I want to do it is I want to impact a lot of people's lives, right? And I'd argue that litigation is probably the best way to do that. But turned out that I wasn't particularly excited or driven by litigation. So I stumbled into corporate law. But like 2 years in, I realized that I can still change lives in a lot of ways. So that's why the decision to move into education. So
Right.
I realized that my education, despite being at a good law school, was suboptimal. And also there were problems in my school education. So when WorldWise started, it was initially something that we started for school children before we pivoted into the college education space, which is what we're doing right now.
Okay, right. So let's talk about WorldWise now. Like, obviously, it's a wonderful venture that you have just mentioned. Like, you started off with schools, and now
Yeah.
you have ventured into law schools. You've ventured into colleges. Uh, there is an idea that runs behind WorldWise. The idea is that the educational system, irrespective of the institution where it prevails, needs to have a transformation for the benefit of the students in order to have what I could understand a rather practical understanding, a more pragmatic approach with respect to how things are to be understood by the students. If you could tell me a little bit about what exactly are those issues that you could identify with respect to the educational system already in place that WorldWise somehow tries to tackle and you seek to transform as a solution.
Right. So personally, I think education is broken in a lot of ways. It's something that I've always been fairly transparent about. And let me give you a very simple example, and it's an example that I give to a lot of students. Right? You're at RML again, top law school by all metrics. You've probably studied contract law for what, 2 semesters? I'm guessing.
Yeah.
You've probably done contracts 1 and contracts 2.
Yes.
Now, I'll ask you a very simple question. Do you trust yourself to draft a contract where you're selling your house?
Not at all.
You're selling your house for whatever. You don't, right?
No.
And it comes down to that very simple question that today the way law school is structured is that it's so theoretical that students don't know how they can create something that's valuable to a client. Now, that client can be a litigation client, that client can be a corporate client. It doesn't matter if you're selling a house or you're selling a company. The problem is that it is so theoretical that you don't know how to convert whatever theoretical knowledge you have into something that is commercially viable, right? So that was the first problem that we identified at WorldWise. Now, and let me tell you why we think that will always be a problem. The reason that will always be a problem is because if you look at how teachers are hired in law schools, teachers are hired basis having an LLM and then having, let's say, a PhD, right? Now, think about it from my perspective. If I have 2 years of work X and someone else has, let's say, an LLM in corporate law, the fact is that in an academic setting, the person with an LLM in corporate law probably has an advantage over me. So there's a natural disincentive towards people who have industry expertise teaching. And the result of that, quite simply, is that most teachers that are there in legal education, unfortunately, have never worked in the real world. So that perspective is what is missing in classrooms. So that's what we are trying to solve at WorldWise, right? We are trying to get people who have been there and done that to try and impart or try and teach things that are relevant in terms of practical legal education.
Yeah.
Now, but it's not just that. And I'll tell you what's the other difference that we really care about. Do you play cricket? Have you played cricket by any chance?
I used to. Yes. I'm aware.
So
I'm aware.
if you
I'm a
play
football
cricket-
fan. I would confess I'm a football fan, but it's okay. I knew a little
Okay,
bit
so
about
which
cricket.
club do you support? Out of curiosity.
Madrid,
this is
obviously.
this can be off the record. Okay. So
No, I
Madrid
can
fan.
I
Okay,
can
just-
have a proper conversation on football day in day out. It's okay.
Yeah. No. So I can use a football analogy as well for
Okay,
the
perfect.
conversation that I'm having, right?
Better.
So I'll tell you what it's like if you enter a top tier law firm, right? After law school, entering a top tier law firm is like saying that I know how to play hockey and therefore I'll be a decent footballer. Sure, you can run around. Sure, you may have a decent positional sense. But a lot of the things that you're actually going to do are things that you're going to do for the first time in your life.
Correct.
So at WorldWise, what we're trying to do is we are trying to recreate what you're going to do in your career, which means that, and the reason I talked about cricket is, it sounds absurd to play a cricket match without net practice, right? The idea is what we are creating is like net practice for what you're going to do as an associate, as an intern, and to prepare students to perform better. So that's what we are currently doing at WorldWise. And we've been lucky because a lot of firms, and we've been talking to firms, and firms see the vision as well. And firms also realize that hiring processes also could benefit from this. For instance,
Absolutely.
if a student from our program is doing what they are going to do as an associate, let's say it's doing a due diligence. So if I make a student draft an actual due diligence report, a firm can make a better hiring decision when looking at that due diligence report, right? So it sounds fairly intuitive. So the other thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that hiring decisions are better and fairer. And we're talking to people in the industry, and thankfully people in the industry, at least some people, have been seeing that vision. And that's the other gap we're really trying to bridge. Because unfortunately in India, students don't just care about what they learn. They also care about outcomes. So ultimately, if you tell someone that, you know what, at the end of this, I'm going to get, if I do really well, and that's the point, right? The idea is if a student does really well, they should get an opportunity at a great firm, because that's the end goal. So we're also trying to work, and we're building more industry partners at WorldWise. So that's what we're doing currently. But the other problem that we see in WorldWise, in the education system rather, which WorldWise is trying to solve, but of course, that's not something that's been out in public yet. It will come out in a few months, whatever. You'll see. And that should be exciting. But the other problem that we're trying to solve is that right now, I don't think legal education is particularly accessible. You don't have access, even if you look at guest lectures, etc. Guest lectures and all are limited to the top law schools or whatever. There's an access problem. And we're trying to solve for that in a different way. Whether we'll be successful or no, I don't know. But hopefully time will tell.
Well, I'm sure you will be successful. There is so much potential in the idea with which you're working that itself is so exciting. One thing that I've noticed, and I was going to ask you this question, that one idea with law students is that you can learn all these practical knowledge, you can learn all these practical skills while you're interning with law firms. But there are two major problems I as a law student have, like I think I have experienced, a lot of other law students would have also experienced, is that number one, we don't always get the internships, and number two is that when we arrive at the internship, they expect us to perform before we even know about a lot of these things. So maybe, and please do tell me if I'm wrong or perhaps even correct, please do point that out as well, that your platform somehow gives us that knowledge in advance before we even get into the internship space, so that we can use that and actually work better while performing in the internship.
Right. So those are two problems that you've correctly identified. And I'll add a third problem to that, and I'll talk about how we are trying to solve the third. The third problem is when you're an actual intern, the reason a lot of associates don't give work to interns, and I'm just going to be candid about this, is because associates are often extremely busy, all right?
Correct.
And sometimes you just don't want to give work to an intern, because rather than teach them and explain to them, and then later have to give them feedback, and then you don't know how good the work product is, sometimes it's just faster to do it yourself, right? And this is a harsh truth, but it's a function of the way legal education is.
Correct.
So I know a lot of my colleagues, for example, just refuse to give work to interns. Some of them, and some of them are really nice, would give interns work, they would give them feedback, but that's again, luck of the draw as to what kind of a senior you'll get. But what we are trying to do, and the distinction that we are drawing, is that A, we want to solve all three of those problems. A, by preparing students for the internship, by simulating the work they will get at interns. B, giving them constructive feedback, because the people giving feedback are essentially associates or former associates at top firms. So the idea is they will give you feedback just like they would have had they been associates, so that you know how to learn, right? The problem with legal education right now often is that, sure, if you watch a video, you learn something, but you've never got feedback because you've never done it yourself. It's only after you draft something for the first time, and then someone tells you what your mistakes are, that you are able to progress, right? And which is why I think that I learned more in my 6 months, my first 6 months at Khaitan of the 2 years, than I did in like 5 years of law school combined. Because on-the-job learning is something that's so powerful. And I think the last thing that you very rightly pointed out is a lot of students don't get internships. Now, for this, what we're trying to do is we talk to firms and we say, you know what, this kid is really good, this kid is performed, look at what their drafts are. And if the drafts are good, no firm wants to say no to a quality intern, right? A firm is always happy to take quality interns. So we're working with more firms to ultimately solve that internship problem also. So because I don't think the problem is the fact that students aren't getting the internship. I think 8 out of 10 students, even if they get the internship, aren't prepared for it. And
Right.
they don't think about it really. They spend so much time focusing on, sir, internship bas dila do, not thinking ki when you get the internship, then what? Are you trained to
Right.
do what the work you're going to get?
Correct.
And
Correct. Correct.
I think that's what we're trying to solve. Hopefully, we're doing a decent job. And thankfully, our students have liked what we've been doing so far. So, touch wood, it will continue.
It sure will. And I think that lays a very good foundation for my next question. And something that I would really like your insights on is post pandemic world. I mean, I would be optimistic enough to say that we somehow are reaching that post pandemic world, and where our, as a student, observe that our surroundings with respect to the industry, the market has become really competitive, somehow transformative in a nature where the opportunities now are to a greater extent limited, but the specific opportunities with respect to the performance and the expectations have increased. In this scenario, in this world, how important is it that the legal education somehow evolves and the law students evolve with it in order to compete?
So, I think for one, you're right in the sense that the market is only going to get more competitive. And the harsh reality is that it is a very competitive market, right? The unemployability amongst law graduates is a bigger problem than we realize. It's not talked about enough, but it is sadly a big problem that's not talked about enough. And I think the way law students can really stand out, honestly, is they need to find a way to stand out. I think there is a conventional path that law school tells you, which is, let's say, do a moot, write a paper, etc., etc., etc. But if your end goal is to get a job, really think about it. Does doing a moot tell someone that you're going to be good at a job? Probably not. Does writing an academic paper tell someone that you're going to be good at a job? Probably not. It's not a clear or an accurate signal. So the reason you're trying to do a moot is because you want an internship that will then get you the job. But I think a lot of students can try upskilling themselves, which is something completely different, which is where you focus on skills that actually matter to, let's say, a law firm. Because if you tell a law firm that, you know what, I have worked on ABC and these are 3 things that your clients do, you're a lot more valuable than someone who spent a lot of time mooting. Now, I have nothing against mooting or writing papers and all of that. And they all add value in their own sense. They are tremendous learning experiences. You make friends. And I'm not telling anyone not to do it. I'm just saying that to stand out, you probably need to do something a little extra. And that's on students to find. My perspective is that you should try and become more skilled to be able to demonstrate that you can do the work that the law firm will give you, or the litigation chamber will give you, or even a company that you plan to apply for will give you. But the idea is, one, you should definitely upskill yourself. 2, in terms of how COVID and the pandemic will change education. See, one thing that we've realized, again, and I don't know if you've attended classes on Zoom, but one thing that we've realized is there can be incredible teachers who are superb in a classroom, but aren't great on Zoom. Because teaching online and teaching in person are 2 very different skill sets. All right. So teaching online, the biggest problem is people get tired, people get fatigued. You need to retain their attention. So there's an element of entertainment, marketing, etc., involved. Where if content is not engaging or entertaining enough, if it's boring slideshows with a lot of text, people don't attend. Like, I haven't attended. There are lots of like webinars or whatever that just aren't engaging enough after the first 5 minutes for me to want to listen to that class, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge with online education. I think the advantages of online education are that if you're in a Meerut, in Aurangabad, in Lucknow, in whatever part of the country, online education gives you potentially the access to someone you never could have met, right? Because this is a law firm partner sitting in Delhi, or this is a senior counsel sitting in Bombay, or whatever. So online education solves the access problem, but access only takes you so far. Because after access, I think the challenge is for content to become engaging enough for students to want to engage with it. And I think that's the challenge that needs to be solved for meaningfully, right? Because I don't think the more and more law students I interact with, and I interact with a bunch of them, they don't enjoy their classes on Zoom. A lot of them are having classes on Zoom and they just don't pay attention. It's just not engaging, it's not fun. There are no discussions because their classmates aren't paying attention either. So in class, like the reason I used to love class is not necessarily because of what the teacher was teaching, but very often because of perspectives my batchmates used to give, right? And I think a lot of that can often get lost in online education. And I think the challenge that exists now is that teachers will need to reassess how they teach. The pedagogy will change completely. And I think that 2 years from now, we may see education in a completely different space.
Right, absolutely. I think education is already evolving, and the kind of requirements with respect to how the students are supposed to evolve with it are also changing. Finally, I think this is my last question to you. With respect to the opportunities that law students are supposed to exploit, what you've just mentioned, the upskilling which is required for law students, apart from what WorldWise offers, I mean, obviously, that is an incredible platform that any law student would love to engage with, any law student would love to learn from. But apart from that, from a general approach towards the law school life, how can law students, in your opinion, upskill with respect to the competition available before them?
Right. So if you're talking specifically with respect to working at a corporate law firm, let's say a corporate practice, I think there are 4 or 5 things that are extremely important. So I think a lot of students need to honestly work on speaking and writing skills. Now, I know it sounds very trivial, but a lot of people, when they submit written drafts, often have grammatical errors, for instance. And as soon as someone gets a draft with multiple grammatical errors, sadly, the truth is that it's not taken seriously. So I think in a corporate setting, if your full stops and commas are incorrect, it's a problem, right? And that's the level of attention to detail you really need. So I think the first start is by trying to work on language skills. A lot of people talk about working on the law as a way to get better, but I think working on language skills is a very good starting point, right? Two, there are other smaller skills that are extremely important. I'd say learning how to format is one of those skills that everyone should know, but not everyone has, right? A lot of students send, poorly formatted documents, and nobody really thinks about the consequences of a poorly formatted document. But you'll find this out the hard way. Trust me, I found out the hard way when I sent a document that wasn't formatted well. Okay. And my senior was just like, bro, what? And I was like, sorry. And you don't want to be in that position. So my honest point is, I don't necessarily think you need to study more contract law. There are a lot of simple foundational skills that you can work on. A lot of students don't know how to use Manupatra and SCC properly, right? And these are what I'm talking about, skills that actually matter. Because today, if I give you an assignment, but you don't know the various tips and tricks as to how to use Manupatra or SCC, that again is a problem. So these are skills that you can work on yourself. In terms of other skills that I think are valuable, I think personally, if firms are engaging in education initiatives, please try and be a part of them. A lot of the best lectures that I ever attended, at least that were relevant from a professional standpoint, were lectures taken by former partners, etc., who are just doing general education. So we've had partners come to law school, we've had partners do platforms. Now, and again, the one caveat that I will put with this is you need to be very careful as to who you're listening to. Don't listen to just a random webinar by just a random person. I think students need to exercise their judgment, because the only thing that's worse than not listening to valuable content is listening to content that is wrong. So make sure that you're listening to people who you actually look up to. And there are a lot of such people out there who are superb teachers and put a lot of content out there. So I think if firms today, like for instance, and there are a lot of firms that write a lot, I think students honestly need to engage with what law firms, etc. write more than they should engage with, let's say, what academic papers write. Again, the caveat being if they are looking for a job. And that's the caveat that I'm putting throughout the conversation. This
Right.
entire conversation is about people who want to get a job. If you're in law school because you want to be an academic and you want to teach, then sure you can do what you want. But if you want to get a job, you need to approach things slightly different.
Perfect, perfect. I think this is the kind of conversation that we as law students should definitely have, and the kind of conversations we very sadly so do not have. The kind of understanding that we need with respect to how to approach the industry, how to tackle the challenges of the industry, how to prepare differently, how to upskill, and how to adopt to different changes is something that we need to understand. And this is the kind of conversation that really solves that each and every problem that we face and gives us an insight. And obviously, WorldWise.in gives us a wonderful, beautiful, beautiful platform for us to work with, something that we can learn from. And I personally am a huge fan of the entire content. I think your website says everything about it. I will link the website down in the description for anyone who is listening to this conversation. You please do visit WorldWise.in. And it's a wonderful, wonderful platform, wonderful venture. Thank you so much, Sanjay. Do you have any closing remarks for
Thanks,
our
Kaustubh.
listeners?
Yeah, thanks, Kaustubh. I think this is great. Just a couple of things. Sure, we do upskilling programs, etc., for law students, but there's also a big information gap. A lot of students don't know what is required at a law firm, etc. So I'll give you. There's a bunch of material we're just putting out for free in terms of which just crystallizes a lot of what I'm saying. What are the skills required? What are the myths at the law firm? We've published material on this which students would benefit from and students should read. That's something that I will definitely send across, which students may benefit from. So that's something they can check out. But in terms of closing comments, I just think a couple of things. Law school is an amazing time. I think I had 5 great years in law school. And I think one of the best things that I learned was that I made a lot of friends. And a lot of those friends remain friends to this day. And they are all people who have been a part of this journey, my previous journey. And I think that's something that we can take for granted. You don't realize that, your friends really matter. And I think that's something that one thing that I wish law school people in law school realize is that I think law school is built up as this really, really competitive place. Everyone seems to be fighting for one job, 10 jobs, whatever. But at the end of the day, please don't forget that you have friends and do things the right way, right? Behave like I'd like to think that we try and do things the right way. We try and have integrity. And I think a lot of seniors talk about the value of integrity. It's something that I've seen. But it's something that I think law students should honestly engage with, because if they are honest and if there's integrity, in the long run, I think everyone will do well. We're a country that's on the verge of transformation in a lot of ways. The industry is on the verge of transformation in a lot of ways. So as long as people are hard, make good friends and are honest and work hard, I think hopefully everyone will achieve their dreams. I hope all law students do, because that's what we wish for every student. And that's what I think the community as a whole should really come together for. I think we don't need to be this competitive. And I think we can just have fun once in a while. So I think that's just my closing comments.
Absolutely perfect. I think this is something that we all need to live up to, something that we all need to quite in a bit understand, and perhaps something that we need to think about every time we go back. I hope that I go back to my law school as soon as possible. And a lot of people who listen to this conversation should enjoy that as well. I had a wonderful time speaking to you. I hope you had a good time too.
Thanks, Kaustubh. This is a pleasure. And best of luck for this. The One Take Show is taking off, and I hope it only does better going forward.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sanjay.
Thank you.